It was a church, then it was a bar, and then the Vineyard bought it and made it a church again. That was my first experience with a church. So when I graduated from school, I decided I want to continue to seek out Jesus. And I had two themes that I was always kind of thinking about in my head. One was that Jesus was sitting next to God in paradise, and he came to here on this broken earth. And I don't know, why would he do that, right? Things are good when you're with God. And but he did that. And so I decided to join a ministry called Servant Partners. And basically what it does is it sends people to be with the urban poor. And so I wasn't ready for a city like Calcutta with, non-potable water. So I went to Los Angeles and I lived in East LA and lived in a community called Pomona. And I went to the Vineyard in Pomona. This is the Vineyard of Claremont. It was a good experience. And that's my apartment, right up there in that corner. And that was my first... I saw Jesus there. I'll just say that. So I'm going to read this story. It's called I Remember Relocating. Oh, we were called relocators. We weren't called missionaries. So I don't know if that's like a thing or not. But anyways, I remember relocating. I remember growing up in Eastern Washington. I remember walking to school. I remember that I read about people in the Bible like Samuel and David, but I wasn't sure if people like that still existed. I remember my first Bible study in college, where all of a sudden people were starting to do things like Samuel and David. I remember wanting to follow. I remember when God had a plan for me to come to LA. I remember the U-Haul truck that had my few things. I remember seeing Mount Shasta just passing the California state line. I remember thinking, okay, folks, buckle your belts and hold on. I remember the brown and the gray when I came down into the LA basin. I remember the sweat. I remember sitting on the steps of First Pres Pomona on my first night in LA, almost like I was driven down by the immensity of Los Angeles. I remember walking into orientation and thinking, what did I just sign up for? I remember my servant partner team. I was lucky to have been paired with those folks my first years. I remember the phone call 2 months later after I arrived in LA. Son, your mom has breast cancer. I remember my dad telling me on the phone, no, you stay. You need to be where God is. I remember going into Pasadena after I'd gotten a job. I remember feeling like Abraham. I remember being stuck in gridlock traffic on the 210 freeway and the realization that now I knew what the grind was. I remember missing snow, and it was there to greet me, my first Christmas home. I remember being asleep one night, and on the other side of the wall, bam, 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 my first shooting. I remember the apartments flooding one winter, the water coming in under the door and soaking through the stucco and the mold. I remember the sunsets down the asphalt driveway and the kids playing soccer between the parked cars and trash. I remember thinking there's beauty here that the world would never understand. I remember how I praised God when my first August in LA was over. So hot. I remember the phone call that Mom had been cleared of cancer. I remember Kenneth, Keyshawn, Eddie, and Hugo. I remember having Bible study with them in our apartment and going to Joshua Tree on the weekends and watching movies. I remember Eddie could smell Lynette's brownies, though he lived clear on the other side of the complex. And I remember to pray for them because Jesus says we should pray and never give up, though it's been many years. I remember when John Freeze, a relocator friend of mine, called me up one Friday afternoon and said, you want to get out of here? I need to get out of here. And I remember we stopped at In-N-Out and then drove the 2 hours to Joshua Tree National Park. And I remember falling in love with the desert that night, something I never thought was possible. I remember remember Lynette, my wife, the first day I saw her, I remember thinking I should marry her. And I remember wondering if this was how Abraham felt about Sarah. I remember walking into my in-laws' house in Fresno, where we were celebrating Christmas that year, and my mother-in-law was holding the phone. She said, "Your dad is on the phone. The cancer was back." I remember flying up every month to help Dad with Mom. I remember getting down with our landlord that there needed to be drains out in front of the apartments to take away the rainwater, because it didn't rain very much in LA, but when it did, it rained a lot. And water just pooled and pooled in front of them in the winter. I remember him hiking our rent $50 every month for 11 months because we took him to task. And I remember when it became cheaper to buy than to rent, so we bought our house. And I remember coming home after flying up to see Mom during her treatments, and there was a 1/16 of an inch of water across our kitchen floor. And I remember the kitchen roof sagging like it was nothing more than a wet sheet. I remember not being able to sleep for those first 6 years in our house, every time it rained. And I remember one night I realized God holds up all broken things, including my house, and that was a load off. I remember there is a way that the sun shines through the oaks in the evening that reminds me God still walks in the cool of the day like he did with Adam long ago, even in August. And I remember Mom being yellow in color and Dad having to carry her to the bathroom. I remember 3 days before she passed being blessed with precious good news that her first grandchild was on the way. And I remember when Peter was born, I would go in every morning at 4 a.m. that first week to rock him in the NICU. I remember holding him and being the most content I have ever felt. I remember when Joshua was born, my second son. I prayed for peace on the day of his birth, and he was born on Christmas Eve. And I remember when Jack was born, my third. I remember when the doctor told my wife she was going to have a third boy. I thought, "Oh, Lord God, give her strength for a third boy." Instead, he gave her more joy. And I remember when Joshua told me, "Daddy, you are angry. Every day you are angry." I remember the numerous times my wife hitting the floor of our bedroom, reaching into the pack-and-play for our newborn at that time. It didn't matter whether it was Peter, Joshua, or Jack, and her huddled with them in the hallway to escape outside bullets. I remember more often than I'd like, there are men with guns in my neighborhood, and every day they are angry. I remember sitting up in the middle of the night and realizing I can have no part with Jesus if I call people boneless, even if it's true. I remember how much D. Martin Lloyd-Jones, who's a Christian author, droned on in studies on Sermon on the Mount about loving enemies and how anger rots a person from the inside out and all that. And I remember in the middle of the night, in an unsettling way, D. Martin Lloyd-Jones was right. I remember that the longer I stay, the more I sense the cross is for everyone, even for jerk landlords and boneless city politicians. But I should act more like I know it because I'm a Christian. And I remember realizing that I was no longer a relocator. I was a part of all of this. After 16 years, sometimes I still feel like a stranger in a strange land, especially when USC plays the University of Washington. But that's okay. I found the Dodgers, and that's pretty good. I give you this testimony because what I remember most about the relocation is the long and windy road through a hot and dry land. And if you were to ask Moses, he would say long and windy roads lead to good places. If you are afraid to follow God into the place where he calls you, I think that is quite understandable. If you feel like it's a big land with many giants in it, some of them scary, that is true. But I don't remember. I know. God is in the land. Sorry. And he will catch you and keep you, and you will be blessed. And I bet Moses could see sunsets in the camp with kids running between tents and trash and think there's a beauty here that is otherworldly. I bet you might find that you are someone who likes windy roads, which is quite an irony in a land of freeways. I bet you'll start recognizing markers saying this leads to good places. I encourage you to choose a life where you recognize God walks in the cool of the day, even in August. I'm not done, I'm sorry. It's kind of a good time to end, I know. This was our church. We still have many friends there. This church reminds me so much of First Presbyterian Pomona. So this was First Pres Pomona. It is not the frozen chosen. Let me tell you that right now. If you've ever heard that about Presbyterians. These people are the remnant, kind of like us. This is the community garden across the street. And kids go there every day. And they get their hands dirty, and they grow things, and they take it home to their parents. And the whole of the community comes together. There are rich and poor. There are multiple languages. And it is truly in the middle of a broken place. There's gunfights at night down the roads, not more than blocks from here. And there are Johns that pick broken women up right across the street. But here, in this place, is Shalom. And this is Pomona Hope. This is the ministry that runs out of that church and does good things, just like Sunrise here. And this is one of the things Pomona Hope did. Those are my kids. This is my best friend, my wife, obviously. That's Jack when he was young. And then that's Lisa Ingdahl and her kid. And they went door to door, basically trying to get signatures to stop a very large garbage company from coming in and putting a transfer station. Transfer station is where you bring trash from 25 miles around to one place, and it gets packaged onto bigger places, and they take it to landfills. And it was a block from an elementary school, and there were going to be 600 buses or garbage trucks going by every day. And so everybody kind of thought diesel and buses and trucks and kids walking to school. This doesn't sound like a good mix. So they collected like hundreds of signatures. Their t-shirts say, "I'm a sensitive receptor," because that was the big thing in the environmental impact report, was that like all this diesel was going to go up and be outside near the playgrounds when the kids were at recess. And that didn't feel like shalom. That didn't feel like the peace that God described not only in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, in the New Jerusalem. Oh, and they stopped it. I forgot about that. So the guy in the middle t-shirt, this is my Bible club. And the white t-shirt, that's Ugo. Ugo I still have a connection with through my friends who are still in Los Angeles and still at the church. He comes in, he lives out in Palmdale, which is in the desert. But he was abandoned by his mother in the apartments I lived in. So he was just home alone one day. When he came up from school, she was gone. She ran off with a guy, and his brother swooped in, Santos, all of 22 years old, trying to hold a job at the tire center at Walmart. And he was just married. He'd been married for 6 months to his high school sweetheart. And he was going to become now the father figure to his older brother, or his younger brother, excuse me, Ugo. And he didn't know how to put a budget together. I know this is hard to see, but these are some of my friends that are still there. This guy, well, the guy in the back with the hat and the guy next to him with the goatee, those are two of my best friends. And if you were ever in a jam or a foxhole, you would want them to be with you. That's why Nate was my best man at my wedding, and it was a coin flip between he and Dave. And so, but Nate and I lived in the apartments, and we ran the Bible club, took the kids to Joshua Tree. You know, getting them outdoors was a big deal. And anyways, we'd listen to Tupac part of the way, and then we'd listen to Christian music part of the way. And anyways, we studied the Bible together, and we roasted marshmallows, and we looked for bats at nighttime, and we had a great time. And some of those kids are following Jesus, and Ugo is following Jesus. So Santos, his brother, Nate, showed him how to hold a budget. And so when his paycheck came in, it just didn't automatically go out, which helped him keep an apartment. These things may sound like small things, but in the city where we live, nobody ever teaches you that, financial literacy. You don't know how to do it. And so Santos and Christy are still married, and they have their own kids. And Ugo is an electrician living in Palmdale, and stops by the church when he comes into town and checks on everybody. And he's trying to follow Jesus, but he's stable, and he's doing well. Some of those kids also didn't make it. Victor was one of them. Victor, when he got angry, he would go look for a fight. And one day the fight was bigger than him. So these are the next generation of all those guys. Peter's on the right, Joshua's in the middle, Jack is down below. And those are Nate's kids, and Karen and Johnny's kids, and Dave and Lisa's kids. So, all right. Before I get there, I'm going to talk about this. So the way you hold a job and do ministry and then buy a house, which I mentioned in the last story, is you buy a house that was previously run by gangs. And then the city kicked them out, and it was pretty terrible. And I can tell you where all the holes were in the siding. And I can tell you how many crack pipes I turned over when I turned over the dirt in the backyard. And anyways, this is what it looks like now. Lynette and I bought it, and we fixed it only through the grace of God and through his provision. And place matters. This place matters. Jesus works here. And wherever you are, whatever you're doing, it is a place where God is because you are there. And this place is a gift. So this is called the work of my hands. So I created this sanctuary in my backyard, away from the craziness of the city around me. I built a lot of pretty stuff and planted pretty gardens. And sometimes I would sit in a chair on a lazy summer Sunday afternoon. And I would remember the story of Ulmo, Lord of Waters, rising up out of the sea, telling Turgon, son of Fingolfin, that he would lead Turgon and help him build a great fortress. And it would become a hidden refuge from his enemies. But, and there's always a but, do not love too well the works of your hands, for salvation comes from the west. That's what Ulmo said to Turgon. Anyway, long story short, Turgon built Gondolin, the refuge fortress Ulmo talked about, and it was all the things Ulmo said it would be. It would be a refuge in the night. But he didn't heed Ulmo's warning, and he perished in the end. He couldn't let Gondolin go when Olmo told him it was time. So before I go on, just a couple of stories real quick. The first week we were there, Lynette was out grocery shopping, and this guy ran up to that front door that you see right there. And he took off his pants, and he tried to come in the door. He was part of a gang, and he was running from the cops. And this was a gang house, so he thought he could get in, and he could hide. Well, it was locked. It wasn't in the best condition. He could have come in through a window. Fortunately, a cop pulled up really quickly, and he took off down the other end. So if you're me, I'm just standing in the middle of the dining room, kind of like this. So this happened a few times. I would say one of the worst times was September 12th, the year before we left, in 2012. And when I called LAPD, or Pomona PD, it was really just 911 for the county, and they would dispatch the closest police department. You know, when it's the nighttime, those dispatchers are just kind of like doing their best, trying to connect services, and they are pretty haggard, tired, and a little bit cynical. And I didn't have to really convince her to send anybody because she could hear the gunshots. So some of you in this room know where Western University is. Western University is in the city I lived in, Pomona. And it was like 6 blocks down the street. And we later found out that in that gunfight, an AR-15 hit a window in the library of the university. So it traveled 6 blocks. I remember Lynette with Peter in the hallway, and Peter was awake, and Jack was asleep in her arms, thank God, and Joshua was just asleep in his bed on the other side of that wall. He was safe. He slept through anything. I don't know how, but it was a grace. And I was the longest 3 minutes of my life. It was 40 feet from where we were. We had a few of those times. I could just tell you that I do not understand why Jesus protects some people and then other people he calls in those moments. But I have come to believe that he is very real and that prayer is white magic. And you should use it. Because even if you don't think you're being heard, like Annette said last week, no matter how messy it is, he is listening. And you are touching something so powerful and good. So continuing on. So this is a fairy tale from J.R.R. Tolkien's Silmarillion. And because I've never grown up, it's still one of my favorite books. And somewhere in my 30s, I started to have premonitions that God might be speaking to me with this story. Sometimes I'd be out working in the front yard, repairing a leaky sprinkler, or at an ungodly height on my ladder, smearing wood epoxy into some rotted corner, or down in my basement with my cement mixer doing foundation repairs. I love that little mixer. It's gone with me to hell and back. And each of those times, I would see Olmo, Lord of Waters, rising above me, saying, "John, do not love too well the works of your hands, for salvation comes from the west." All in my mind's eye, of course. There are no crazies in this house. At first, I'd just see Olmo and feel like, But as the years rolled and the more I repaired and built, the more it would happen. And sometimes, as I would be walking through the Home Depot, I should have brought stock in that place. I'd hear that baritone whisper that only a Lord of Waters could have. And I'd start to be more, what's the word? Not disturbed, but reflective. Yeah, that's the word. Wondering if there was something going on and feeling misgivings. And then it started to happen when I wasn't doing anything at all. And maybe that's when it started to get under my skin. And as I was saying, I'd be sitting in a chair on a Sunday afternoon, next to the fire pit I built out of the bricks I salvaged from the restored foundation, which is a stupid idea to build a fire pit in a very fire-prone area. And I'd hear Olmo rising up, and put out, I'd murmur to myself, "Oh, can't I get a break on a Sunday without the Lord of Waters being spooky?" A long time ago, I knew that we lived in a tough place, and if anything ever happened to me, I wanted the house in good shape and the backyard to be a selling point, so Lynette could get her and the boys the heck out of here. I also wanted to create something that took me away from the things of man, right outside my back door. I didn't want to have to drive the 2 hours to Joshua Tree. And so I worked on it. And one day when I was repairing the upstairs window, I ripped open the drywall to find mold in the studs. And I doused that stuff with marine RV antifreeze, because that's the stuff the EPA hasn't gotten to yet. It still has everything that will kill anything. And then I sewed it back up after it dried and repaired it, the window, so it wouldn't happen again. And I realized I was putting a little bit of myself into this place, and I cared about it. Does that make sense? That what one invests in, that's where their heart starts to be? Anyway, this is the point where folks reading could say, maybe the house became more than it should have been. And maybe it did, and maybe it didn't, but I don't think that's really the point. The point is, salvation comes from something else and someone else. And in the in-between time, from when I bought it until now, as we're packing up, working on this place was a ministry to me, a gift to my family and to my neighbors. The world sometimes reminds it's going mad. Heck, on my own block, it can feel like that. But to be able to take a Sunday afternoon and work with my hands and do something that was practical and had a tangible beginning and end, taking what was broken or a little off and making it better, straightened out, and prettier, kept my head above water on those days. And there were many of them. Yes, this place made me want to tear my hair out once in a while with all the things that were rotting or broken or soon to crumble. And I'm definitely more gray and bald. But man, compared to the stuff out there on Pomona streets and in man's halls of power that's prematurely aging folks, hands down, no comparison. I would take the house and its many structural defects in any number of ways it needed TLC all over again. And yet salvation comes from something greater than our works. And life takes left turns. The plan had been that Dad would pass because he's male and in a demographic that isn't super healthy. And he would just slip from the world quicker, and because Mom came from warm climates, she was from the South, I would have no problem getting her to move to Southern Cal, where winters are like Lynette's brownies, just out of the oven. And heck, even if they weren't, grandchildren create their own magnetic field. But like I said, life takes left turns, and we lost Mom first. And I look back, and Olmo, the Lord of Waters, rising up in the vapid aisles of Home Depot with his uncomfortable reminder, started talking to me to that part of me that never grew up. And it made me contemplative as a husband and a father and a son, as a man. What was love? What was the narrow path? Do I let Dad grow old and alone, all in the name of ministry and justice? And somewhere I came to terms with the fact that mighty currents were flowing, and I probably don't have the grip to steer them where I want them to go. And also, salvation comes from above, not by anything I do. So how special was this place to us? Despite its headaches, Peter coined this place the Watchtower a long time ago. From all of our organizing meetings with streetlights and retentes and redevelopment, and neighborhood watch, and all the ways we worked on shalom, he's grown up watching his home be a hall of justice, a place where it was discussed and then people put their backs into it with superhuman effort, just like Green Lantern and, of course, the big guys, Kal-El. As I say goodbye, I remember all the ways Olmo blessed me to let this place be redeemed through the work of my hands. It took some superhuman effort. And how it allowed me to participate in the work of redemption of my neighborhood, however backbreaking the task was, and made me cuss more than I used to. In the city I lived in, with urban poverty in LA, we don't always go to bed feeling that we've done something tangibly good that has results we can see on a day-to-day basis. And I bet people here feel like that. But this place was the one place where I felt like that. It was good to hit the pillow and feel good about how a Saturday afternoon had gone, or a Wednesday night down in the basement after work, and then watch how it started to be a place where people could meet and create a good story about good things. And yet that stuff can't save you, because salvation comes from somewhere else. And until I realized it was time, Olmo continued to water our souls here. I can recount 4 or 5 times during the 10 years we were here at the Watchtower that a teen would walk by and say something like, "You live here?" I'd be out mowing the lawn or cutting back the plumbago, and I'd say, "Yeah. Wow, you've made this place beautiful. It's not full of gangs and scary like when I was a kid." And after we had accepted an offer, I was telling Kim, our realtor, that this place has made an impression on my family that I can't duplicate. And that's why we wanted these buyers. He had wanted to know why we lived here and how we'd come to a place in the transaction. And we'd come to a place in the transaction where we could sit down around the dining room table and talk about the things that had been on our minds. He had been dying to ask, "What possessed you and Lynette to move into this neighborhood and raise children?" "You know, Kim," I said, "the reason our backyard has gravel in it isn't only because it's water friendly and all that. The first year I was here, tilling it, breaking it up hardpan, it hadn't been watered in ages. It seemed like every row I turned uncovered a broken crack pipe. And though I collected all the crack pipe shards, I never felt like I could be sure. And I didn't want future kids to be walking barefoot in grass and get cut. So no one's going to get cut with a couple layers of gravel." It blew Kim's hair back a bit. He sold a few places in this area of Pomona and has some stories. But I think this story got him because he realized it was our choice. And he realized something bigger was going on with what happened to the home he was selling that rose up above Lynette and I. And yet how do you convey to him it was all a gift? This place with us in it, its condition at the beginning, and its redeemed condition now is part of a story that continues all over the world in broken, struggling places by the Lord of Waters, just like here in Yakima. And maybe Kim just hadn't had the chance to see it in action, sit in it and look around, see the gang sign just behind the Simone Silva copy in the dining room that Lynette and I couldn't completely rub out with our blue paint job. I don't know. That's between Kim and Olmo. But there are people all over the world, heck, right here in Yakima, working out Olmo's command to build a refuge from the growing night, a fortress of peace, and to love their work, throw themselves into it with superhuman effort, but always remember, salvation comes from Yahweh. We sold the Watchtower to a family that really wanted it. Some dude from Taiwan bid up a bit, but what am I going to say to Olmo when he comes my way on the last day? That guy was going back to Taiwan, and then what? That I took what he entrusted to me for money? Would it just be another gang place, rented for profit? If you care about something, you stay close to it so you can take care of it. That's what I was doing, going back home to be with Dad. And this place still needs some TLC every now and then. The new owners lived in Pomona most of their lives. They manage 4 KFCs, including one on Mission, about 4 blocks from this place. And the man of the house worked part-time as a youth pastor at a church in San Dimas. Anyway, this isn't an area of town that is some naive adventure for them. So we prayed, put our hope that someone would continue with the story of shalom in this neighborhood, and made our best educated pick from Kim's culling. Now it's in Olmo's hands. Place matters. I've been saying goodbye in small ways for a few months. The way the sun shines through the double hangs facing west. The memories of Christmas in the Red Room. The birthday parties across the street with Norteño music and all of our friends and neighbors. The boys' room and all the superhero paraphernalia seems just as it should. Perfect for little boys. And my sanctuary away from the things of man, the backyard garden. We were at an open house at Peter's school, and Lynette and I were thumbing through his writing journal. He was in kindergarten at this time. One of the pages was a picture he had drawn of a window with a tree and a bird on its branch. In his 6-year-old scrawl, he had written in the caption, "The birds in our trees are my alarm clock." And I know what he's talking about. The grand old oaks tower along the house's south side like sentinels to shield us from the summer sun. They provide a place for the birds to wake us, and I will miss those morning tunes. But, there's always a but. Salvation comes from the King, and when he shows up for the last call, I know I won't be able to take anything with me. Not the oaks and the birds, not the perfection in the boys' room, not all the things I've done. And that's a good thing to teach my kids, that wherever they are, make it matter. But be ready to pack, and pack light. Tarrying is a bad idea. Olmo's Island is spacious, and there are only slots for those who want to show up. There's something good about new things. This has been the best spring yet in our backyard garden. The watchtower looks well and feels like it's showing off a bit. The tomatoes seem to be on an accelerated growth plan, and every sunflower seems to be coming up in just the right place. It looks green and vibrant, and though I'm a mixture of sorrow and joy, fear and excitement for the new change before my family, overall I'm grateful for everything Olmo has done. And I take all of this as a closing gift from the great gift, that of a loving God's who made my hands and teaches me what matters. Teaches me what matters in loving ways. It's spring, and it's time for new things. People sometimes ask, are you crazy? After all you've done with that place, you want to sell it? But maybe being less smart and looking foolish is a must-do, and a once-in-every-10 years sort of thing, like seeing the Grand Canyon on a midnight run, or going across Golden Gate Bridge by yourself in your underwear, at least once in your life. Some folks thought this place was a job and a half 10 years ago and wondered why we bought it. And now that we're leaving, they wondered why we're selling. All I can say is Turgon was a smart dude, but he tarried too long, and I sense now is no time to tarry. Instead, it feels like it's a good time to pay homage to mighty waters and set sail on currents that are stronger than I am. That is my testimony. Thank you. I would like to leave you with these two scriptures. They are the most powerful scriptures in my life. One man went and looked and looked and looked for the pearl of great price. And when he found it, he gave up everything. And the other, I would say he was kind of a fool. He was just walking along and he stumbled across it, but he knew what he had when he saw it. And he didn't just sell everything for the treasure. He bought the whole field around the treasure. And that's crazy. So I've had both of those playing out in my life. And I suppose if there's any way that Jesus has marked me, I am both a fool and somebody who has sought a great pearl.
That's awesome. Thank you, John. That was super encouraging, and I can admit personally challenging as well. I feel like I need to do more things like John does and be brave. I'd like to have the worship team, if you guys could come up, please. And if you guys would just, somebody around you, tell them good morning, give a hug, high five, say hi. That's John's.